Guzzlers. We're going to sort of fine dine. We're going to fine dine, but I've got let down on me meat. So it's sort of semi-fine dining. We're dining aboard the Orient Express. Now, I'm starting early because I've got to get me potatoes done. Now, you might think, what's special about that? But we're not just having potatoes, we're having Duchesse potatoes or Duchesse potatoes. Okay, and they need quite a bit of messing around in preparation. Now, I'm starting with about 500 kilos of peeled russets, or something similar to those. There's a little bit more than that here because I've just noticed as I'm peeling them, some of these are a bit manky. So I'm going to be removing various bits. But the first thing we've got to do is get these chopped up into about inch cubes. Get rid of that manky bit. And then I'm going to chuck them in a pan. No water or anything in there at the moment. So I'm going to get the rest of them done in there, and then we'll move on to cooking them. But tonight we're dining on the Orient Express. We're having lamb cutlets, sort of, fried in butter, accompanied by Duchesse potatoes and asparagus tips. So that's them chopped up in there, and what we now do is we're just going to cover them with some water. I've just previously boiled this, and then we're going to give it a generous pinch of salt, and we're going to boil these now for about 10 minutes. Now we essentially want to make sure that they're not too soft. We are mashing these, sort of, but at this stage we don't want to do that, so that we can stick a knife in them, but we don't want to go in too easily. Okay, and in the meantime, while they're boiling up, and like I say, about 10 minutes, let me get that salt in my hands. We're also going to make sure our oven is on around about 200-205 degrees, and you're going to need a baking sheet with some parchment paper or something like that on it, because we're going to then put the drained potatoes in the oven and cook them for about another 25 minutes. We're sort of semi-drying them out a little bit. Okay, so that's the potatoes on the go. Like I say, this is a long process. You're going to need some butter, some nutmeg, a piping bag. You don't have to, but we're going to. Okay. 3 eggs. You're going to want 1 egg, and you're going to want 2 extra egg yolks. I said butter, didn't I? Oh, you're going to need 2 lots of butter, because you're going to need butter at 2 different stages. And that's just for the potatoes, and then they're going to go back in the oven once we've piped them to be cooked. So that's why we're a little bit early yet. We've got to get these potatoes done. That's bloody fine dining on the Orient Express for you. Right, so that's the them potatoes cooked a bit, and so all I'm going to do now is spread them onto this baking paper. So, Orient Express. What's the Orient Express? Well, I think most people know it. Well, I say is a train. It was a train. I never realised it doesn't actually run anymore as such. The Orient Express was a train service that essentially went from Paris to Istanbul. Well, that's what it was originally. So it was a long distance railway service that ran from Paris to Istanbul, which started in 1883, And so at that time it would take like almost 3 days to travel that distance. It eventually had terminals in London, Brussels, Athens, but they came later. Initially, like I say, it was Paris to Istanbul, and it was considered a luxury passenger service. Now, before I go ranting on too much, I want to set this timer for about 20 minutes, and like I say, we're just going to do them in there, and then we're going to bring them out. Now that's when you're going to need a sieve. Now you could use a potato ricer, but it doesn't quite give you the same texture as you'll get with passing it through a sieve, and that is how it should be done according to Auguste Escoffier, who was the chef, or the chef who prepared the menus for the Orient Express. So we're going to just let that go for about 20 minutes, and then we'll come back and I'll carry on telling you a little bit more about Orient Express, and since I've just mentioned him, Escoffier. So that's them potatoes out of the oven. They're just starting to brown now. But what we want to do is, now obviously the brown or crispy bits aren't necessarily going to do much, but we want to try and pass this through the sieve. Now, it's not going to be the easiest of jobs, okay, which is why some people would be tempted to say get the rice on it and do it that way, but it will result in a much creamier final potato. Now actually, I'm telling you about the Orient Express, and I sort of misled you really, because the first journey didn't actually go to Istanbul, it went to Vienna, but it later expanded. Whoops, try not to get on that tray there. It later expanded to be a sort of semi-regular route across Europe, Paris to Istanbul. That's say New Zealand for some weird reason then. Now, the recipe, Pommes de Terre Duchesse. Essentially, that his actual original recipe translates as: prepare a potato croquette mixture and mould into the form of a small brioche à tête, or bread rolls or flat cakes, or pipe out with a piping bag. And that's a bit we're going to do. I'm trying to do two things, look one way and look the other at the same time. Onto a buttered tray. Brush with beaten egg and place in a hot oven to colour some 7 to 8 minutes before serving. So these are going to be cooked again, okay, but before we can get to that, we've got to get this potato through here. So that was Escoffier's recipe, and he devised went on to devise the menus for the Orient Express, and it eventually became, I say eventually, quite soon it became, like I say, this luxurious method of travel, renowned for its luxury and its fine cuisine. It had 2 baggage cars, a restaurant car, which was done out like any fine dining room of the time, and it had 4 sleeping cars with a total of 56 beds on board, because obviously it's going to take near on 3 days to get anywhere. So this potato is going through. It might look like there's still quite a bit in the sieve there, but there is stuff going through into into the pan. Now I'm doing it back into that pan because we're going to be cooking it as such with some butter and nutmeg and some pepper. Now, the first menu on board that he devised, which was served on the 10th of October 1882, was oysters, soup with Italian pasta, turbot with green sauce, chicken à la chasseur, fillet of beef with chateau potatoes, chaud-froid of game animals, lettuce, chocolate pudding, and a buffet of desserts. At that time, it wasn't actually called the Orient Express. It didn't become called that, or didn't get that name until 1891. So several years after it actually started. World War One, 1914, because of obviously where it was travelling, they had to suspend the service, and so the Orient Express didn't run during the war years, and then restarted again in 1919. It is going through, but I'm going to continue trying to get what I can through. And then, like I say, once we've done that, we're then going to be mixing some other stuff. Right, I think we got to the point now where we've got them sort of more crispy bits, you know, and the tougher skin. We've got quite a big panful there. I've also noticed that some of them brown bits have obviously been squeezed through the sieve, but it isn't going to matter because we're going to be browning it finally in the oven anyway. So I'm not sure I'm going to get much more off of that. So just scrape. I've been scraping as I go along. Just get the remainder of that potato. Whoops, get in there. That potato off of there, and we'll ditch that in a second. But there's our potato. Okay, let me just move that butter because I don't want, that's not the one I want. And I'm going to want this later. So, actually I might just leave that there. Can't do because I need that ring, so I'm going to put this over here. So, what I've got now is I've got some white pepper, some nutmeg, I've got about 50 grams of butter. Now, like I said, we are going to add in egg to it, but if we add it at this stage, it's going to scramble the eggs, and we don't want it like that. Okay, so we want a pinch of nutmeg, that should do. We want about half a teaspoon. There's a better measure this because it'll end up too much, won't we? About half a teaspoon of white pepper, and then, like I say, 50 grams of butter. Now, we now just want to mix all that in together, melt that butter. Got to be just careful here, obviously I don't want to catch the potato. So, the Orient Express, like I say, it came back into service after World War One. The 1930s were its heyday. That was when, you know, it was at its most popular, if you like. And there was 3 services by then. Whoops. There was the Orient Express, the Simplon Orient Express, and this came about because of opening up a tunnel that gave it new routes, and the Arburg Orient Express, again taking slightly different routes. So you can't really see, but as I'm melting that butter and it's mixing in, it is very, very creamy. It's obviously not lumpy mashed potato at all. For those of you who think, oh, I think mashed potato, it's lumpy mashed potato. I mean, for many, many years I would never touch mashed potato, and that was because of school. The lumpy mashed potato, I don't know what about it is, it's boiled potato, it's just, I think it's the texture, you're just not expecting something that's supposedly meant to be all mashed up to have lumps in it, are you? And I've also realised it's now past 6 o'clock, oh, it's a bit warm in here, and I ain't got a drink. I'm saving the wine for a bit later on. Nobility, royalty, bourgeoisie, business people all favoured the Orient Express because obviously it got them from A to B, but it got them from A to B in luxury. Again, it got interrupted by the Second World War, so war again interrupted it, 1939. However, in 1945, not all of the services came back. And then, of course, after World War II, the Iron Curtain started to fall across quite a few of the nations that some of the trains went through, and gradually the communist ones were taking the standard Orient Express carriages away and replacing them with their own that they were running themselves, and obviously things started to decline. And so by 1962 the original Orient Express and the Arburg Orient Express stopped running. There was just a Simplon one, but that was then replaced in 1962 as well by a slower service, and it essentially just ran cars from Paris to Belgrade, and twice weekly services from Paris to Istanbul and Athens. Right, I think that's just about all mixed in there. So I'm now going to take that off the heat, and we're now going to leave this to cool down to about room temperature, and at which point we're going to be adding our eggs. Like I say, if you add the eggs too soon, you're just going to have scrambled egg in there, not very nice. Okay, and actually what you've got to do is prepare your eggs. We want 1 whole egg and 2 egg yolks. So I've got those eggs, actually they were from 2 different batches, and one really bright orange yolk, the others were quite yellow. I've got a feeling my local supplier hadn't got any, and we had to buy half a dozen from Tesco's. I suspect they're the paler ones. So I'm just beating them together, and now hoping that it's not too warm, we're now just going to beat all that in together. To begin with, it's a little bit tricky because the potato just wants to slide around all over it. Gradually, as you start breaking those lumps of potato down, it is starting to blend in better. So you've got a very creamy mixture here. So these will not go into the oven directly. They're going to chill for an hour once we've piped them. That will help them firm up. Quite amazing how when I first put that in there, I think panic mode. That's way too runny, but it's now it's fully incorporated in there. So, I told you about it gradually declined in what was going on. 1971, the original company that supplied all the carriages and that, the Wagon Lee company, sold off or leased off the remaining carriages. They did continue to supply the staff. It's just they no longer sort of run the carriages, if you like, and the trains. Paris Athens service, 1976. That was it. I'll get the last bit of potato. 1977, the direct Orient Express service was withdrawn. There were various companies that were running sort of things. I mean, I think at one time you could even go to London and get on one of the original sort of trains simply for the dining experience. I think my parents did it. 10th December 2009, the final train called Orient Express departed from Vienna, and that was it. And to be honest, until I was sort of doing this, I hadn't realised that the Orient Express no longer exists as such. So we're trying to recreate one of the dishes that Escoffier invented, if you like. Employed like top chefs, top French chefs to do all this. So what we're now going to do is we're just going to pipe. I'm using a star nozzle. Some mounds of potato. You don't have to use a star nozzle. Like I said, if you want, you can just spoon it out as such. I'm hoping to make about 4. I might be making them a bit on the big side. The wife was out, can't eat black potato anyway. Yeah, bubbles in that one. But there you go. So, like I say, these are now going to chill for an hour. So at this stage, everything's on a hold, because we will cook our lamb when we're ready to start baking these in the oven. You're also going to want some melted butter, which we will brush over the top of these once we bring them out of the fridge before we put back in the oven. So if you want to turn your oven off, you'll be wanting to put it back on again for 200 or 205, but that's up to you. So that's the potatoes ready for the next stage. Told you all about Orient Express. I can bore you about August or Escoffier when we come to the next stage. Although you won't necessarily see this, we've had quite an extended break, getting on for an hour while the potato has been in the fridge. Oven's up at 205, like I said, and now we're going to cook these cutlets. Now, when I went to the butcher's, because the supermarket doesn't do things like this, and we discovered we've got 2 local butchers, and so the wife said go to this one because the parking's easier. I'll have to check out the other one. A little bit disappointed in what they had available, and when I said to him I'm after some lamb cutlets, he said to me, you won't get any of them this time of year. He said, far, far too expensive. He said British lamb has gone through the roof. He said ridiculous prices we're paying for lamb, and he said and cutlets is just like out of the question. He said, so best I've got is these chops. And that's some nice big packs of chops. And I bought them, but when I got them home, I realised they're all a bit uneven. So I've picked out here 5 fairly even ones, and if you think they don't look even, you want to see the ones I've taken out and put in the freezer. And what I've done is I've seasoned salt and pepper on one side, and I've just flipped them over, and we're now just going to put some salt and pepper onto that side. And then we're going to cook them in clarified butter. Oh, I should have added, by the way, I haven't done it yet, but this is actually, I got all these recipe from Max Miller, Tasting History. Better pause now. I've had some beer. We're now going to try this flurry. Thought I'd go for a French wine. And let it breathe for a little bit. Let's try this out. A little bit sharper than I was expecting, to be honest. He said it's quite fruity, and I can't remember what else he said about it now. It's a nice, as it describes, a really dark wine. Anyway, I digress. So I'd seen something about Max talking about dining on the Lusitania, and I thought, oh, don't want to copy him too soon. How about doing the Orient Express? So I thought, okay, then let's see if I can find some recipes of the Orient Express. And bugger me, I discover that about a month ago, or a month before I found his Lusitania one, he'd done one on the Orient Express. So I thought, oh well, I'll nick that one. So this is actually off of his channel. Okay, and just like Escoffier said, Max said you want some nice thin lamb cutlets. Well, these are hardly thin, are they? I did debate whether to try and cut them thinner. I thought I'm going to make a right mess of that, so I've not done that. Okay, so these are going to require a little bit more cooking. Now, when Max does the cutlets, because they're so thin, you're about 3 minutes on each side. So he essentially started to cook his potatoes already. I've not done that because I suspect these are going to take obviously a little bit longer. We want to make sure the internal temperature, so I've got my thermometer here, is up to 65. So I think I'm going to cook them on one side first. Now, if you haven't got a big enough pan, and you might not want a big pan, I'll tell you why in a second. If you haven't got a big enough pan, you want to cook these in batches. Okay, I think I can get all of them in there. But even so, I think I'm going to cook them on one side, and then when it's time to flip them over and cook the other side, I'm going to put my potatoes in the oven. So remember, before you do the potatoes, you're going to want some melted butter. Okay, so I've got about 30 odd grams in there, but essentially you just want enough to brush over your potatoes. Excuse me, that's the beer that I had earlier. So the original Escoffier recipe says, cut the cutlets very thin. Well, we ain't doing that, are we? And shallow fry in very hot clarified butter. So I've got some ghee here ready. Arrange them in a circle on a dish, sprinkle with some little lemon and the cooking butter, after adding a pinch of chopped parsley. Serve immediately. And this is from the famous cookbook, which wasn't just recipes, it was techniques and everything else. Le Guide Culinaire by Auguste Escoffier, produced in 1903. Now, you're going to need enough butter in here, which is why when earlier I said to you, perhaps you might want a bit, you might not want a bigger pan. You're going to need about 1 centimetre's worth across the pan of butter. So I'm just going to put that on there. I might need to add a bit more. Okay, obviously this is, you might argue, a little bit unhealthy, the amount of butter that's in it. I went in Tesco's and I thought it's probably under the speciality, you know, where they do all the Indian and the Mexican and all the other ranges. But I looked down the butter in that range first. No, not there. So then went speciality aisle and it had loads of different things. Could I find it? Went up and down that aisle twice. Went back to the butter and margarine aisle. No. So I thought I'd have to ask someone. Well, there was loads of people in Tesco's about. Most of them all stood around doing fuck all but chatting. And there was some young lady stood at the end of the aisle, and I thought, oh, I'll have to ask her because the others are ignoring me. The ones who seem to be older and senior. And I thought, unfairly, as it turns out, will she actually know what the bloody hell I'm talking about? So when I said, excuse me, I said, I'm trying to find some ghee. And she looked at me a bit blank, and then I said, it's clarified butter, it normally comes in a tin. Oh, she said, I know what you mean. I said, spell it G-H-E, and I felt a bit bad after that, because she said, oh yes, I know. So I'm just looking up which aisle it's on. She said, I suspect it's probably under all the speciality ones. I said, well, I've been up and down that twice. And I said, and it's going to probably end up being there, and I've missed it. I'm just going to add a little bit more. And she took me right to it. It was on the top shelf, partly obscured by a label, but to be fair, I should have seen it. I said, yeah, I knew that would be the bloody case. I knew it would be there. Thank you very much for your help. And I felt a bit mean afterwards, you know, saying to her, oh, you spelled G-H-E-E. When she actually knew what it was once I explained it, clarified. Well, actually, what surprised me is she didn't know what, she at first didn't know what ghee was. When I said clarified butter, oh yeah, I said comes in a tin. She said, oh yeah, I know that. Anyway, we now want to get this nice and hot. That I'm going to put in the fridge in a second. And then what we're going to do is we're going to put them in there. So Escoffier came up with this recipe. Okay, and like I say, we're going to get this up to temperature and we're going to cook one side. And if you're doing thin cutlets, about 2-3 on one side, 2-3 on the other. Now, who was he? Well, actually, I referred to him as Auguste Escoffier. He was Georges Auguste Escoffier, but he went by the name Auguste. He was born 28th of October 1846 in France. He died in Monaco 12th of February 1935. I think he was about 88. But, excuse me, that beer I had earlier, I did rush that beer a bit. I've been waiting, the wife had to go out and buy some because Tesco, she forgot to put it in Tesco. But his body was returned to France and he's buried in the family plot in France. So, he was a chef, a restaurateur, a writer, who basically popularised and updated cooking techniques and traditional French cooking. A lot of it based on some French woman who I can't think of her name in the past, but he adapted her methods and updated them to fit in more with the keeping at the time. A little disappointing, that one, mainly because it's not quite what I expected. Unlike Escoffier, rather than this being the King of Lloyd's, he was known as the King of Chefs and the Chef of Kings. This oil, I think, is getting quite hot now, so as you can hear that sizzling. So I'm just going to place these chops into that hot ghee, and there's plenty of room in here to do them all. Whoop, so I was dropping it. Okay. So, and while that's doing that, at this stage I'm going to get those potato Duchesse out of the oven, pre-G-vened. Fucking hell, what's wrong with me? And at this point I'm now just going to brush them with this melted butter. Now, They have firmed up quite a bit. I suspect if I hadn't put them in the fridge, they would have been a little bit squidgy when I'm trying to do this bit. I didn't butter or grease the underneath of the parchment paper, so whether I regret that later or not, I don't know. But there you go. So that's now got them like that, and now we're going to put them in the oven for about 20 minutes or until they start going golden brown. So remember, that's about 200 or 205. Okay. Now, Max's recipe is just the potatoes and the cutlets. But I thought, well, we need a bit of green stuff, don't we? So I'm just going to fry off some asparagus to go with it. And I've got a pan at the back here. I've put a bit of clarified butter in there, a bit of ghee in there, and I'm going to cook them in that. Don't run away. Now, when we finish cooking these, we're going to want... Did I start my timer by the way? No, I didn't. We're going to keep the butter, or about 120 mils of it, and we're going to flavour it with lemon. So we're not actually adding the lemon yet. Okay, the lemon will be added later on. So, pardon me, I don't know what's still repeating on me. Now, at the time Escoffier came into doing his cooking and everything, kitchens were alright. Noisy, loud, riotous, drinking on the job places. And he said, we're not having any of that. He said, things need to be regimented, they need to be done properly. We'll have silence in my kitchen, there certainly won't be drinking on the job. And he had previously been in the military, and he used his military sort of upbringing, if you like, to bring some kind of order into kitchens. And many of the hierarchical sort of stations that he created at that time are still in use today in many traditional kitchens. He went on to go in partnership as such with the hotelier Caesar Ritz, and also with him went into prominence in London at the Savoy, and the Ritz Hotel in Paris and the Carlton Hotel in London. But he wasn't necessarily Mr. Perfect. So anyway, these are cooking well in there. Shortly I'm going to start my asparagus off in a minute. But before we do that, we're also going to want to chop up, like I say, a bit of parsley. Okay, so I'm just going to get some of that out of there, and we'll get chopping that. I think it's time to just turn these chops over. Okay. I tried to pick, I said to you about they were all a bit uneven. I tried to pick some that were a bit more even in size, obviously because we want them to cook at the same time. Okay, and I've just put my pan. I've just put the pan on. I'm going to be cooking my asparagus in a minute. Now I've got my parsley chopped, and I've got a lemon. Depending on how much butter there is, anything from half to 1 whole lemon in there. But that's essentially all the ingredients done. They're cooking nicely. They're starting to look a hint of brown, but not quite there yet. My lid's starting to be a bit clipped out from the budget. Stay there, you little shit. Stay, you little shit. Otherwise I'll move you. So, I was saying to you about Escoffier. So he wrote his book, and it became like this worldwide, you know, Bible, if you like, and it is still in use today. However, before we get to the however, he did create some famous dishes. One of which was when he was working in the Savoy, in honour of the Australian singer Nellie Melba, who was visiting. He invented a dessert, the peach Melba. He also then later made the Melba toast. He made something known as a Bomb Nero, which was a flaming type of ice cream, and fraises à la Sarah Bernard, who I think was an actress, a French actress. In fact, many years ago, we stayed in a gîte, which was a really old building. I don't think it was originally, well, it might have been, but it would have been more like a farmhouse. But it was next door to a big manor house, which is where Sarah Bernhardt lived. If I've got the right oh no, sorry, that was Josephine somebody. Got the name wrong. Never mind. Anyway, he invented this dish for her, which had strawberries, pineapple and curacao in it. Bit of alcohol. But then, 1897, the Savoy were getting a little bit concerned because probably wanted a bigger pan for that, but my bigger pan's in the dishwasher. I should have probably got that out. So I'm just tossing that in that butter. I better turn that down a bit. Oops, not that right. The Savoy were getting a bit concerned because the amount of business was going up, and yet the revenues were going down. So they brought in this auditing company, who in turn employed some private investigators who set about following Escoffier, Ritz, and one of the other partners in the business to find out what was going on. And they discovered fraud. And the three key people, including Escoffier, when this all came up and they went to the board of directors of Savoy and told them, all three of them were dismissed on that day. So I'm just going to check the temperature inside some of them chops. That one there, 55, 56, 57, 58, 59. They're not quite there yet. I think some of the slightly thinner bits is probably there. So like I say, they were all three dismissed. However, it was sort of kept a little bit, although it was obvious they were going, and apparently there was a little bit of a riot amongst staff, it was sort of kept a little bit low key. Escoffier was the only one who admitted to committing a crime, and his crime was, that he admitted to, was that he was taking kickbacks from suppliers. So it could be taken up to 15%, or rather they were declaring like 15% less. And he was obviously taking the difference. And when they worked it out, the Savoy said that they basically lost £16,000 due to this fraud, which obviously back then was quite a lot of money. And Escoffier was found liable for 8,000 of it, and they basically said, you've got to give us that £8,000 back. The others all tried to plead, oh well, we might have been a bit generous with giving out like free meals and things like that. But that was more just part of. Weird actually, one side of these cook quick. I turned them over and the other side I was cook as well. But anyway, he was the one who ultimately was done for the monetary loss, and like I say, he was told he got to return 8,000, and he said, well, I've only got 500 quid to my name, which he did have, that's all he had. And so they said, right, okay then, give us that and we'll call it quits. And so that was the end of that matter. He did go on, like I say, he moved along with Rich to the other hotels, and he established himself there and carried on establishing his reputation. In 1928 he created, or helped create, the World Association of Chefs, and was, you know, basically made president. In 1919, when he was 73, in honour of all the work he'd done for cooking and everything else, he was made a Knight of the Legion d'Honneur. And in 1928, he was presented with a medal of the Officer of the Legion d'Honneur. So he got some of the highest decorations for someone like him, you know, non-military decorations in France. Now I think the asparagus is just about there, so I'm just going to turn that down a little bit. Let's have a look at that. Potatoes, not quite. Actually, what I might do is rotate that round, because one side of the back is a fan oven and the back is getting brown all in the front, so I'm just going to rotate that, but that's generally almost there. Time is almost up on them anyway. So I think what we're going to do in a second, oh, I'm going to check that one. And so Scarfio did get married, oh, even then there's a bit of a story that goes with that one. That's up to, oh, it's not quite there yet, that's 59, needs a bit longer. He married Delphine Duffy. Alright, I know. On the 28th of August, 1878. That's up to 60, so we're still not quite there yet. However, apparently, he was playing a game of billiards with her father, and she was sort of like part of the bet. So, so he actually won her in a game of billiards. Apparently, that's what they say anyway. Right, I'm just flicking these over one last time. Bleeding mess everywhere, butter, little shit. And then, like I say, he died 12th of February 1935, age 88, in Monaco, where he was at the time. But as I said, he's now in the family vault in France at Villeneuve. Right. I think what I'm going to do in a second is, obviously I'm going to turn that oven off because they've had long enough, but I'm leaving them in there for a minute. I think these asparagus are ready to go, so we're almost ready to plate up. But first we've got to create our lemon butter. Right, I've turned the heat down on these chopped cutlets or whatever. I'm just going to remove them. And we're going to, wait, don't you dare, you little shite. We're just going to remove them and let them rest for a little bit while we prepare the lemon butter. So like I say, we're going to use the butter and all the juices from the lamb that's in there. So I'm going to start by adding, well, actually going to turn the heat off, trying to make sure there's a couple of pips there trying to get in there. And you just gone in there, you little bugger. Just have to be careful when we spoon that out. What have I got I can spoon that out with? It might have to be a ladle. I think the other sort of spoon thing isn't really there. So, just going to mix that in. And then we're going to carefully do a little taste test. Bear in mind this is hot butter. I'm getting the lemon. Worried about the bloody pips now because there's some in there already. So I'm just going to add some more. But I suspect, to be honest, the amount of butter I've got in here, I might want to add a little bit more. So let's try another bit. Now, I think I'm going to add another lemon. There is a lot of butter in there. So I've just put the chops back in that lemon butter. I've served up the asparagus. Now I'm just going to get them potatoes out of there. You can see here are they nicely browned. So let's hook. Oh yeah. That's going to slide off of there. There's one, two for the wife. Try to fix like all the ones which you say, I can't call them, there's so many bloody things and that lot. That's them two. That's that done. And so, which one's the wife's? That one's the wife's. That one's, oh, I can't remember now. Yeah, that was the wife's, wasn't it? Right, so we now, oops, dropping butter all over my nice lovely clean hob. Slippery little fuckers. Come out. So that's them on there. Although the recipe sort of said prepare your lemon butter and then add it afterwards, I just thought, well, while I was waiting and plating up, I might as well put the chops back in there, absorb a bit of flavour. That's that in there. And then all I'm going to do is just I'm going to ladle. He says try not to pick up any what's that? Some of that butter over the potatoes, over the chops. And it's going to be a little bit tricky tasting this, so you're going to have to rely on me that this have a bit extra. I shouldn't do really too much butter in it. And then we're just going to give it a little sprinkling of parsley, and there is your meal that was once served on the Orient Express from the recipes by Auguste Escoffier. So now we're going to go and scoff them.